High-intensity workouts are making you fat. Everybody's wrong about this, but I'm going to tell you the truth, and this is backed up by clinical research. If you're working out hard enough that you lose your breath, you're going to want to listen to this. There are 3 ways your high-intensity workouts are making you fat, and here they are. Number 1, high-intensity workouts strip your muscle tissue. Number 2, high-intensity exercise spikes your stress hormones like cortisol and prolactin. Spiking stress hormones like cortisol and prolactin is clinically proven to lead to more belly fat.
Is high-intensity exercise going to make you fat because it increases your production of stress hormones? It is true that during and immediately after a high-intensity exercise session, there's an increase in both testosterone and cortisol. However, following that large increase in cortisol, there's a subsequent large drop in cortisol below baseline values, and cortisol levels during sleep are lower in exercised individuals. And then cortisol levels subsequently return back to baseline after approximately 24 hours, which means your 24-hour cortisol production ends up being the same, if not lower, after an exercise session, due to the large increase and the subsequent large fall below baseline. With that being said, in the video it was stated that elevations in cortisol after exercise have been clinically proven to make you fat. It is true that having chronically elevated levels of cortisol appear to increase abdominal obesity, and they also increase food intake and decrease energy expenditure. However, this is chronic elevations in cortisol in inactive individuals. But the context in which cortisol is elevated is extremely important. We know that cortisol increases whole body lipolysis, which is the release of fatty acids from stored fat tissue. With that being said, cortisol also increases the uptake of these fatty acids. It does this by increasing the activity of a specific enzyme called lipoprotein lipase that facilitates the uptake of fatty acids into cells. This enzyme is located predominantly on adipose tissue, muscle tissue, and heart tissue. In the muscles and the heart, these fatty acids are used as energy, and in the adipose tissue they are mainly stored as body fat. With that being said, it has been demonstrated that physical inactivity suppresses the activity of the enzyme that uptakes these fatty acids for energy production on skeletal muscle. Therefore, in the state of physical inactivity, the fatty acids floating around the bloodstream have a greater likelihood to be reuptaken back into adipose tissue for storage. However, exercise itself increases the activity of this specific enzyme on skeletal muscle but not on adipose tissue. Therefore, during exercise, those fatty acids that are floating around your bloodstream are uptaken primarily by skeletal muscle to be turned into energy. Therefore, we have 2 different scenarios. In the state of physical inactivity, cortisol increases the amount of fatty acids available in the bloodstream, and they are predominantly uptaken by fat tissue expanding fat mass. However, cortisol released in response to exercise liberates fatty acids from the fat tissue, which can be uptaken by the skeletal muscle to be used as energy, which is quite literally the process of fat burning. And this is why it has been demonstrated that high-intensity exercise reduces total fat mass, abdominal fat mass, and visceral fat mass. You see, cortisol in and of itself doesn't necessarily make you gain body fat. It is the context in which cortisol is elevated. If cortisol is elevated in a state of physical inactivity, when the muscles do not have an energy demand, the fatty acids floating around the bloodstream can be uptaken by fat cells and stored as body fat. But in the context of exercise, because the skeletal muscle has an increased energy demand, the fatty acids that have been released from fat tissue are diverted away from the reuptake and storage in fat tissue and towards the skeletal muscle for energy supply. And therefore, this increase in cortisol actually assists in the fat burning effects of exercise.